Howdy everyone. Welcome back to Harp and Guitar. Whiskey here, so thanks a lot for coming back. It's always good to see you. So today for Whiskey's Blues Gumbo, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the term Juke Joint and all its different variations and meanings. Now, the term Juke Joint actually comes from the term juke, which was a type of dance. It was sort of a sexually explicit type of dancing that was done in the South back in starting in the late 20s and in through the 30s and 40s. But it really gained popularity, through the late 30s, early 40s for sure, when we were seeing a lot more of these juke joints pop up. Now, as I said, juke style of dancing was a sexually suggestive style of dancing with lots of hip gyrations and emulating sexual positions and that sort of thing, and sexual acts and so on. And this all was done, to the rhythm of the music. And as I said, it gained popularity when we saw a lot of these juke joints pop up. Now, essentially what a juke joint was either a private residence or maybe a cabin or a building that was out in the woods or out in the trees, where people could come to party after dark. There'd be alcohol and live music. Obviously in the South back then, most places didn't have electricity at all, so it's not like you could just pipe in a bunch of music and turn the lights on and start serving cold drinks. It just didn't work that way. So local musicians were hired. Usually they were paid in booze and maybe some food. And then they would just make their change from people at the party goers that were dancing. People would go up and pay a nickel or a dime and request a song, and the musicians would play the song. And these places became known as juke joints. So from this word juke, this sort of sexy, gyrating style of dancing, comes the juke joint, where this dancing took place with a bunch of raunchy, hard-driving music, the blues, in the South, the Mississippi blues, the Delta blues. And this eventually paved the way to when electricity eventually did make its way to some of the rural areas in the South in the late 40s and early 50s after the war. This led the way to the jukebox, which was obviously a mechanical replacement for a lot of these bands. It was much cheaper for somebody who owned a juke joint or a blues bar or a blues tavern, to invest in a jukebox and fill it up with some blues records that people love to dance to, and stick that in the corner and plug it in. Now, as I stated earlier, there's many other terms for juke joint as well, sort of maybe based more upon not the type of music that they played, because all of these places played the blues, but on the type of blues and on the type of customer, and maybe even the type of setting that some of these places were in. Some of them were called juke joints or roadhouses. These names are self-explanatory. A roadhouse would be, a bar or a private house where they would have these parties, obviously on the side of the road or at a crossroad or an intersection or something. But they were also known as barrel houses, which is where the term barrel house blues comes from, this type of subgenre of blues, which was generally played on piano, and it was this sort of a boogie-woogie style, hard-driving style of piano playing called barrel house. Now, these juke joints or whiskey houses were also known as barrel houses because a lot of times, the tables and chairs and the bar and all the furniture and everything were made out of old whiskey and beer barrels, but also because very often on the bar they would have a whiskey barrel tipped on its side with a spigot in the front, and you would pay, a nickel or a dime, depending, for a twist of the spigot to fill your little shot glass with a shot of whiskey. One other term that juke joints were also known as, besides barrel houses, and that was a bucket of blood. Now, a bucket of blood would be called such because obviously it would be in a rough part of town, a place that would be frequented by drug dealers and criminals and crooked card players and pimps, and more often than not, fights would break out and somebody was going to get stabbed or slashed or even killed. And these places sort of gained a reputation, and only certain musicians after a while would play at a place that was known to be a bucket of blood. And usually these musicians were quite tough in their own right, and very often would get into scuffles themselves with patrons or even the joint owners. So because these places were so rough and tumble, and more often than not somebody was leaving there on a stretcher, they became known as a bucket of blood. The expression coming from the fact that for every night that they had a blues party, a bucket's worth of blood would be spilled. So there you have it, another edition of Whiskey's Blues Gumbo. I hope all you fellows enjoyed it and found it interesting and informative. I want to thank you for coming by Harp and Guitar, People in Music, and we'll see you again real soon. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care.